Hello, I'm Steph from iDriver Classic, and today I'm following on from the video that we did last week about Valerie the Triumph 1300. We said goodbye to her, she left the fleet for pastures new, and I hinted that there might be something else waiting in the wings. What I didn't quite let on was that we already knew what it might be. So first of all, I'm starting off in my office seat at work because this is where this story begins, and this is probably one of my favourite gotcha stories that I've had with a car, and it's a little bit silly as well. So I was sitting at my desk, whiling away the time, I was doing a bit of paperwork, doing a few emails, and the phone rings. And I start speaking to a man called John. And John, I think probably, I'm one of those people, I think, that probably could be lured by a serial killer, because you offer me a car or a project and I'm there. I barely ask any questions at all. And this was one of those scenarios. John rang the phone and he said, I have a car that you might all be interested in at ADO Restoration. It's old, it's British, and it hasn't moved for about 20 years. And I thought, great, sounds exactly like the kind of basket cases that we take on and get quite excited about. But there's also a bit of a backstory to this, in that we'd recently been reminiscing about what a great time we'd had with the Standard 10 last year. You might remember watching those videos of Speedy, and we said, let's look for something else. And we've been all over Facebook Marketplace and eBay and all the rest of it, and we hadn't really found anything that tickled our fancy. We wanted something that was going to be doable but wasn't too bad, and also wasn't too expensive either. And I got chatting to John and I said, go on John, tell me about this car. And he said, it's a 1958 Austin A35. Now Matt, the parts manager who sits behind me, has one, and his ears immediately pricked up when he saw me write down Austin A35, and he said, yeah, you've got to do it, you've got to do it. And I said, go on then John, how much is it? We entered into that dance that you sometimes enter into with people, where they won't give you a price over the phone, they want you to come and see it, and you get into this scenario. And I said, look John, I can't be both buyer and seller, so what are we talking? And he said, it'll be under £1,000. And I thought, bingo, that's project money. Let's go and have a look. So I asked for some pictures, and this was the picture I received. Now the car, all I knew was I knew, sadly, the previous owner had taken it on about roughly somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago. There was no paperwork, it hadn't moved in all that time, and the man was very passionate about the 1940s and had really got stuck into stuff like his wartime Jeeps and all his dancing and all his brilliant hobbies around reenacting the Second World War, that he'd just run out of hours in the day to invest it into this A35, which is why nothing had really happened to it. Wasn't really that sinister at all. I thought, yeah, go on then. So, sorry, I've got the cat knocking things off the table in the background because she's here with me this evening. And anyway, we get out onto the open road. We've got the trailer loaded up and we have got a wad of cash in the pocket of my coat. So anyway, we get down there and you might be wondering what we saw. And this is what we saw. And thankfully, John had done a bit of the legwork before we got there with John's lovely widow, Glenys, and she was an absolutely lovely lady. So you can see it here. We're stood next to the car before we've dug it out, and blimey. So now I'm going to cut to the footage of us digging it out, and I'm going to chat to you over the top, because I think if I tell the story now, I'm just going to start laughing, because it was the most chaotic 2 hours of my entire adult existence, I think, digging this car out and pulling it out with the aid of Paul, one of my friends at work, and Barbie, which you may have seen a review on just recently, the Suzuki Vitara, the £500 Suzuki Vitara that only got put on the road a few weeks ago. So it's like a good medley of chaos. So anyway, let's cut to this footage and I'll chat to you as we dig out this lovely little Austin A35. Picture the scene. We turn up and we are already at a disadvantage, because what you can't see, and is slightly off camera, is where I've placed the camera. That's the end of the yard that we're trying to pivot round in. So really there's not a lot of room for us to pivot Barbie round to get the car into the right position to pull it straight out. Just in case you're wondering why we are pulling at an angle, especially when that car is so blooming close to the wall, which also explains why when we tell you in video number 2 that we didn't get a chance to have a proper look under the driver's side of the car. I mean, there was only so much that we could do. So what we had to do is we had to essentially try and move Barbie round into position to try and get her into a space where we could try and pull this car out. I don't think I would have wanted Paul's job of trying to manoeuvre the car into the right position. Now, because the car hadn't moved in so long, one of our biggest problems was that we just didn't have a car that was going to roll freely. Everything was kind of locked on, and so we were in a position that we were dragging everything out. So far so barn find, I would say. And I think a lot of people do misuse the term barn find, and it gets a little bit grating, but I would say this is probably as close to an urban barn find as you're going to find, because this certainly wasn't a garage. And also I've tried to be quite careful about not showing particularly where we are, because there are still things and people at the house, and everyone deserves a little bit of privacy. So that's why I'm not really doing a full pan round to show you that entire yard, because I don't think it would be too tricky to work out exactly where we are. But as you can see, the rope method didn't really work. So what we then had to do, I say we as in the royal we, because you may not be able to see, but it is me steering, is Paul had to get the starting handle and essentially bump this old girl out of the garage. But it did tell us one thing, that the engine wasn't seized on, which was good news for us, or should I say good news for Paul, because he'll be the one rebuilding the engine, because we are the 2 people that have taken this on, and we are turning this old girl around. Now as you can see here, we managed to get her out. I say we again, the royal we, I'm only doing the steering, and everything was going really well, except that I don't think we really can see it here, but the rope kept snapping, and oh, I forgot to tell you, the tyres are also peeling off the wheels because they are so old and so flat. So you can probably see that here, and we dragged it for as good as we could get it, but you can see here that the tyre fully peels off like the skin on an orange. What do you do in a situation like that? Well, we were quite lucky in that John's friend Ken, who had passed away, had 2 spare wheels, and on those spare wheels were 2 tyres that weren't, well, they weren't entirely horrendous. So we thought, right, okay, let's see what we can do. So what we did was we decided that we were going to pump the driver's side up, and of course we didn't bring a tyre pump with us because we were running so late, and this is us just getting everything out and getting these wheels out. And we're like, right, okay, let's get these wheels on. So that's what we did. And John, because he was a man who actually thought about this situation and brought a few more bits than we had brought with him a tyre pump. He kept it in his car. So what we then did was we then started inflating these old tyres. Now I did slightly fear for my own life, and I thought, oh God, am I going to blow my own face off with these tyres exploding? But thankfully, and no spoilers, didn't blow my own face off on any of the tyres. And then what we did was John, who by the way is 80 years old and one of the most energetic 80-year-old men I have ever met in my entire life, it's probably all that rock and roll dancing he does, said, right, I'll just crack on and move that. And then I started, well, not doing very much, but I actually popped off to go and get all the other bits that we'd forgotten inside the house, which you can see me flashing there is the paperwork. So I kept asking, can I do anything? Can I do anything? But John essentially stepped into my role and became more useful than I was. So at this point, I'm just a bit of a useless foreman, watching and observing and not really offering too much into the scenario. But the idea was we were going to change these wheels, and then we were going to drag it out and get it onto the trailer. You see Glenn is there getting a few bits in the background for us, but you can also see the seats, just a little bit of a spy there, getting those in. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, and should probably mention at this point, that we'd not been able to locate the chrome horseshoe for the front of the car. You can see at the start of the video it was missing. We showed Glenys a picture, and she went through all the various lockups and little hiding places and eventually found it, so we got that loaded in the car as well. So at least in the period of time that we were here, we didn't waste it, we did use it quite effectively. There is a bit off camera as well of John digging through attic-y bit to get these seats out, but again, because I was holding the ladder, it wasn't really appropriate for us to start filming that. Right, we've got these tyres on, so it's probably time to start trying to get the car back out again. Now, I feel like we've breezed through this, but we were here for so long. It was absolutely wild. The terrible tyres were inflated, the rope was reattached, and we got her going. We started to finally get her out of her hiding spot from the last 20 years. And this is a massive deal because the car hasn't moved, and everyone was quite emotional by this point. And I think Glenys was also quite emotional because it was almost a point where she had to say a bit of a final goodbye. Although this certainly won't be the end, because we've already told her that she can come back and have a test drive once Ken is MOT'd, back out on the road and on 4 decent tyres. But first, it's back to the workshop. And that, my friends at home, is us digging the car out. And it was really funny because we laughed all the way home, so we were like, this is just the most chaotic thing that we have done in absolutely ages. But it's really easy to get caught up in the moment and to wonder what on earth is going on next. So I'm going to flip upstairs, which is where the car's stored, and we're going to go and have a quick look around. And then I'm going to tell you how we're going to get this car back on the road and how we're going to stagger these videos, because it's not just a case of taking it in and putting it in storage. We are going to turn this car around so she gets her first season back on the road for this upcoming car show season ahead. If you know me well, you'll know that I'm a Morris Minor girl till the day I die. Like, there is nothing that can top it for me. And of course, one of the competitor cars for the Morris Minor was the A35. So it does feel like a little bit of a wild jump for me to go from the Morris into the A35. But begrudgingly, because I said that I wouldn't form an emotional attachment to this car whatsoever, I already do feel a slight fondness for it. It's a funny little thing. Now, one of the most interesting things for me about this car is the fact that we are starting out with a fairly decent car, but zero history. We know nothing about this car. And one of the things I probably should say is that at some point in this video series, you will see the registration change on this car. And I would like to make it incredibly clear that it is not us that is changing the registration on this car. It is not Glenys or Ken that changed the registration on this car. It's whoever owned it before it. So what they've done is they've left the old registration on the car, which is an Isle of Wight registration, by the way, for those of you that, like me, are a little bit number plate geeky. And also our tow car is also an Isle of Wight car, so maybe it's a good omen. But anyway, it wasn't us that did it. Somebody else has done it before. The only bit of paperwork that I've got for this car, including a little bit of an old V5, is on one MOT, is this bit of paper that says that the plate has been changed. So it starts off as PDL, but it goes on to one of those age-related plates. It's 3 numbers and then 3 letters. So if you're watching this series and thinking that I don't respect their heritage of cars, it was not me. And it's one of my bugbears, is when cars get so far through their lives and then people take the plates off them. It drives me nuts. But anyway, coming back to this car that we're looking at here, I would love to know your thoughts. Is it as bad as you thought? Is it better than you thought? The driver's side, by the way, is the bad side. You know, there's always a bad side, isn't there, on these cars? And Paul reckons that it might have been an accident at some point, because you can see here, you might have seen at the front, it's got a fiberglass ring on, and it's got this ungodly little bit of damage to the back as well. But hey, all the best cars have had a backward shunt in their lives. My Morris Minor had at some point, and I didn't know about it until Andy rebuilt it and said, oh, it's had a bit of a shunt at some point, do we sort that out? And I said, absolutely. But this passenger side doesn't look that bad. It actually looks okay. Now, I wanted to show you this, and there's going to be someone who says, why didn't you wash it? Well, look, what's the point of doing this first video if I don't show you what day one looks like? And also, I thought I'd show you what I can of the interior. And the interior doesn't look that bad. There's one seat that's collapsed. Obviously, I don't know which is drivers and which is passengers. That certainly wasn't something that I was trying to work out. You can see there it's a little bit collapsed. There's some of our spare parts that we've got. it's all a jumble, it's all chaos at this moment in time. But the door also doesn't shut very well, but we'll sort all that out as we go along in this series. But as you can see, whilst the driver's door has a hole in, the rest of it doesn't actually look that bad, and the odometer is either showing, I keep forgetting, it's either 33 or 35,000 miles from new, and I suspect that actually might not be far off. Well, if you're wondering what we're going to do, this is a rough breakdown of how we're going to stagger the videos going forward. So first of all, we're going to get her up on the ramp, a little bit like we did with Speed and Standard 10, and show you what we're working with underneath, because we are not going to hide anything from you in this video series. We're going to try and start the engine. Now, we do know, as you saw from that video earlier, that we can get the car we can get the engine to turn over, so we know the engine isn't seized, but we're going to try and get the engine started to hear what it sounds like, because it's only showing 33,000 miles on the odometer. I mean, is that genuine? Who knows? Don't have any paperwork. However, looking at the condition of it, I don't think that's probably far off it. I don't think it's been rocking around the clock several times, and it hasn't moved in a long time, so it could be right. So we're going to do that. We're then going to tackle the bodywork. We're going to show you how we treat the underside of the car. We're going to start drilling into all the other various bits and pieces, and each week we're going to show you doing different things on the car, and at the end we're going to do a full review video as though it was a car that I've borrowed off somebody else, and we are also going to do a full breakdown of what we have spent on the car. Now, if you've made it this far into the video, you're probably wondering what we paid for this car, and I didn't know whether I was going to tell you or not, but here's the thing. I am going to keep everything open and honest. So we paid £650. And by the way, I actually offered £600 at first because I've been in Yorkshire long enough to be as tight as a genuine Yorkshire person now. But we met in the middle and we settled on £650. Glennis was really happy with that. John was really happy with that. I was really happy with that. And we all were. And we thought that was a really great price, because we've got to consider the parts we've got to buy, we've got to consider the man hours going into the job, and all the various bits in between. This is a new adventure, it's a new year, it's something new to get our teeth stuck into. And as I said to you in the last video, when the joy stops with a car, you should move it on and give it to somebody else to get going with it. And I'm really excited to get going with this. Unfortunately, Ken, the previous owner, because he passed away, never got to get that joy out of the car. So this we are doing with Ken very much in mind, and with our tow car being Barbie and with the previous owner being Ken. And we're wanting to really honour him whilst we're doing this build and get it back on the road. There was only really one name that we could settle on for. So I guess I end this video by telling you that we are going to get going with Ken, the Austin A35. So until next week, when you see us get that car up on the ramps, take care and drive safely.